Hello guys, welcome back to my channel and enjoy this fanfic part 2. Now let's start the fanfic. Shibuki sighed as he looked at the massive amount of paperwork in front of him. Why is it that every year more and more kids want to become a shinobi? The teen asked out loud as he looked at the paper in front of him. He then heard a knock on his door and smiled. "Come in," the teen said as he was looking at the door. When he did, he saw a male with a giant scar in the shape of an X on his face come into the room. "Shibuki, I have some things that I would like to discuss with you," he said, looking at the male in front of him. "Alright, but aren't you supposed to be teaching the students down at the Shinobi Academy?" Shibuki asked, looking at him with a rather concerned look. "No, not today. Satsuki is taking them on a field trip to show them the hero's water," the male said, looking at the teen in front of him. "Alright, well then what is it that you want to talk about?" Shibuki asked, looking at the male in front of him. "Well, it's a few different things actually," the male said, looking at Shibuki. "Okay, well, what are they?" Shibuki asked, just slightly annoyed with his counterpart not answering him. "Well, most of them are about Naruto," the male said as he grew just a little bit nervous. "What about Naruto?" Shibuki asked, looking at him. "Well, first off, there's that attack from 3 months ago. It's obvious that they had no other intention other than capturing Naruto. Now I and a few of the other shinobi have been talking and we think we might know why that is," the male said as he pulled out some papers he had put inside his coat. They hadn't fallen out of his coat on the way to the tree because he had used his chakra to make them stick to the surface of his jacket. "Take a look at these," he said as he placed the papers down in front of the teen. Shibuki nodded and picked up the papers. Most of them were nothing more than information about students at the Shinobi Academy. However, he then came across the file of Naruto and the file of Fu, both of which had a red circle around them, more specifically their chakra levels. Shibuki noticed that there were some boxes that weren't shaded and one that was. The ones that weren't shaded read very low level, mid-level, intermediate level, and high level. The one box that was shaded in, however, read very high level. However, upon closer investigation, Shibuki noticed that Naruto's name also had a red circle around it. "Please explain," Shibuki said, looking at the male in front of him. "Well, I'm not sure how familiar you are with chakra, but kids around Naruto's and Fu's age usually have low-level chakra, sometimes mid-level if they belong to a clan. So these two having a very high level of chakra is unusual to say the least," the male said, looking at him. "I see. So is this a mistake or is there some sort of explanation for this?" Shibuki asked, now genuinely interested in what the male in front of him had to say. "Well, the explanation for Fu having a high level of chakra is simple. It's because she's a Jinchuriki. Jinchuriki naturally have high levels of chakra because of the biju that is sealed inside of them. So once you find out that Fu is a biju, it really isn't that strange for her to have a high level of chakra, seeing as how the biju are creatures that are made out of pure chakra," the male said, looking at the teen in front of him. "Alright, so what's Naruto's excuse?" the teen asked, looking at the ninja in front of him. When he asked this, the male sighed. "Well, that took a bit of digging for me to figure out, but I think I have the reason as to why his chakra level is so high," the male said, looking at Shibuki. "Then please enlighten me," the younger of the two said. "Well, it has to do with his last name, Uzumaki," the male said, looking at the teen in front of him. When he saw that his leader had a confused look on his face, he sighed and decided to explain. "That's right, I had forgotten you weren't there. Well, when your father ran the village, we would receive a visit from a clan. They would come here to relax, buy a few souvenirs, then leave. This clan was known as the Uzumaki clan," the male said, looking at him. "I see. So this Uzumaki clan is where Naruto is supposed to be right now?" the teen asked. "No sir, they suffered a major blow some years back and all of them were presumed to be dead. Seems like we may have the only Uzumaki left," the elder male said, looking at the teen figure in front of him. "I see. So what makes you think his clan has to do with any of this?" Shibuki asked, leaning forward slightly. "Well, The last group that came through here allowed us to conduct some basic tests on one of their younger members. Believe it or not, she was actually around Naruto's age when we conducted these tests on her. The male said, looking at his leader. Her? Shibuki asked with a brow raised, looking at the male in front of him. Yes, sir. It was a young woman named Kushina Uzumaki. She had a chakra level that is equal to Naruto's. Since this is really all we have to go on, I came to the conclusion that Uzumakis have a naturally high level of chakra. As to whether this is true or not can't be confirmed. The male said, looking at him. I see. Speaking of Naruto, how is he adjusting? Shibuki asked, looking at the male in front of him. I'm not sure. No shinobi will take the mission, the main reason being who he's living with. However, it doesn't seem to be good. Some of the villagers have figured out that Naruto and Fu live together and are now transferring some of their hatred over to him. Then on the same level, he seems to be adjusting rather well. The male said, looking at him. That's good to hear. How are they doing when it comes to food supplies and clothing as well as the other basic essentials? Shibuki asked, looking at the older figure in front of him. They're doing just fine in that department. Since most of the store owners won't sell food to Fu because she's a Jinchuriki, she takes the money that we give her and gives it to Naruto. He then takes the money and buys everything that they need to live for the next month. I'm a little surprised that he actually gets food that healthy instead of just buying a bunch of junk food. The male said, looking down at the smaller figure in front of him. Well, he did come here alone and stated that his parents had no role in his life. So maybe it's not so strange to think that he learned how to cook for himself. Shibuki said, looking at him. I see. That is also very strange. I can only imagine that the ones that attempted to kidnap Naruto have either already kidnapped his parents or that he took it a step further and actually killed his parents, knowing that obtaining him would be a much easier task than obtaining a full-grown adult. The elderly man said, brushing some hair out of his way. Yes, that seems to make sense. Speaking of which, how close are the three of them to cracking? The teen asked, looking at him. When he asked this, the male sighed and looked at him. Not any closer than we were 3 months ago, and as this morning, we only have one prisoner left. The male said, looking at the teen in front of him. What do you mean there's only one left? Shibuki asked, looking at him. Well, we know how you can be about these type of matters, so we tried to avoid giving you the information until we were finished with them. We know that you aren't the type that would approve of our more effective methods, so we were going to wait until as long as possible to tell you about the interrogation. The male explained, looking at Shibuki. I see. Well, what became of the other two? Shibuki asked, looking at the elderly man in front of him. Well, we started off with all the usual treatments and no signs of anything really were shown. They each showed no signs of fear or regret. Hell, they didn't even show signs of feeling any pain when we jabbed superheated kunai into their sides. As a result, we ended up accidentally killing one of them. The male said, looking at the teen in front of him. I see. Well, that's rather disturbing. So what happened to the other? Shibuki said, looking at the male in front of him. Well, we found out something rather interesting last night. The remaining 2 ninja have a powerful genjutsu placed on them. So to be sure our reports were correct, we did several tests on the deceased body and it also had the same genjutsu placed on it. When we found this out, we spent all night debating on whether or not to release the genjutsu placed on one of the surviving men. The elder male said, looking at Shibuki. So I'm assuming that you all came to the conclusion that you should release him, Shibuki said, looking at the male. That correct. However, when we managed to get the genjutsu undone, something unexpected happened. The man's heart just completely stopped working and it exploded inside his chest. I've never seen a genjutsu that had that type of effect on someone before. Meaning that wherever they came from, they saw this situation and prepared in advance. The male said, looking at Shibuki, who was still sitting in his chair. So we basically have a zombie in the torture department that you don't know what to do with, Shibuki said, looking at him. That is correct, sir, and as much as I know you hate having to make decisions like this, I'm going to have to ask you to make one of those choices. I need you to decide what we do with him, whether we kill him or keep him locked up. We need a decision as soon as possible. The male said, looking at Shibuki. When he said this, the teen tensed up and was quiet for a moment. He's right, I do hate having to make choices like this. Deciding whether someone lives or dies, something about making that call just doesn't feel right. Shibuki thought to himself. Sir, we need a decision, the male said, looking at Shibuki. After a few more moments of silence passed, Shibuki finally spoke. Put him to death by lethal injection, Shibuki said, looking at him. When the male heard this, he nodded and walked out of the room. After he had left, Shibuki let out a sigh and continued to do his paperwork. All things considered, I feel like I made the right choice. Letting him go is clearly not an option, and if we release the genjutsu, he'll die anyway, so, at least, this way he won't feel any pain. Shibuki thought to himself as he looked at the paperwork. In Konoha, the elderly man who watched over the village looked down at his desk. He had just finished the last proportion of paperwork that he had to do before the day was over. He sighed, feeling relieved knowing that he had finished much earlier today than he had in a long time. However, his relaxed feeling soon came to an end as he heard someone knock on his door. Come in, he said as he straightened himself. However, the visitor he received was not one he had expected to receive, or at least not one he had expected to see anytime soon. The figure that emerged was none other than one of his former students. He had long white spiky hair and an aged face, as well as a giant scroll on his back. Hello Hiruzen, the male said as he entered the room. Oh well, hello Jiraiya, I see that Father Time has been most kind to you. The elder of the two said as he looked at his former student. Yeah, he has, and I can see that he has done the same for you, the white-haired toad sage said as he looked around the room. Is something wrong? Hiruzen asked, looking at the elderly male in front of him. No, I'm just fine, the toad sage said as he approached his former teacher. He then pulled out a notepad and a pencil. So I was thinking it's been a while since we had done some student-teacher bonding, so I thought tonight we'd go out and catch up. What do you say? Jiraiya said as he wrote on the paper. When he was done, he passed the note to Hiruzen. The old man looked at it for a second before he picked it up and read the contents of the note. Your office is bugged, it's not safe to speak here. Let's move to a new, safer location. I have some news that isn't for the ears of our listener. When Hiruzen saw this, his eyes widened slightly and he looked at Jiraiya a little surprised. Yes, I would love to go out for drinks tonight. Will anyone else be attending this event with us? Hiruzen said, looking at Jiraiya. Yes, although it's just Kakashi, the white-haired male said, looking at the elder figure in front of him. Really, why's that? Hiruzen asked, looking at his student. When he did, Jiraiya turned the piece of paper over and began to write once again. He's an old friend of mine. We met one day at a book signing and he brought a copy of ICHA Paradise for me to sign. Jiraiya said, looking at him. However, what he wrote on the piece of paper was entirely different. He's encountered the enemy we are going to discuss. It was years ago, but I believe that he may still have valuable information that we need. Hiruzen nodded at this and then said, all right, sounds good, so where should we meet up? The elder man asked, looking at the younger male in front of him. Let's meet up at your house, Jiraiya said, looking at him, but once again wrote down something different. We're going to meet at my house at 7. I already checked both your house and Kakashi's house and both of them are bugged as well. My house is the only one that hasn't been infected yet. Alright, well, it's decided. What time should we meet up? Hiruzen asked, looking at him. We'll meet up at 8. Jiraiya said, and once again the note held something different. We'll meet up in an hour, then again at 8. That way it looks like we really did go out to talk and catch up. Hiruzen nodded at this and Jiraiya smiled. Alright, sounds good, I'll see you then, Hiruzen said, looking at the white-haired male figure in front of him. He then watched as the toad sage walked out of the room. So I have some people that are using the information they have obtained from me for their own personal gain. Well, that certainly would explain a few things, however, this is also very disturbing at the same time. I've come here into my house every day and it's unsettling to know that someone has been in both of them without my permission. The elderly man thought as he looked around. He then moved a massive amount of chakra to his eyes so he could locate the seals that had been placed in his room. He saw 5 pieces of paper placed in different locations in the room. One the ceiling, one beside the door, one on a wooden part of the window frame, one on the floor, one on the wooden chair, and the final one was right beside the pile of paperwork he had just finished. When he saw this, he just sat there quietly trying to think of some way he could remove all of the tags from the room. However, in his little fantasy he lost track of time, and when he once again looked at the clock he saw that it was close to the time that he was supposed to meet Jiraiya. So he calmly got up and walked out of the room. When he did, he took a left and went into the bathroom. Once he was in there, he let out a sigh and used the shunshin to get to the house undetected. Jiraiya was little surprised to see his room fill up with smoke. However, his confusion soon passed as he saw the elderly figure he had come to respect in the middle of it. Using the shunshin to get here, that way no one knows you're missing. Smart move. Then again, what else would I expect from the very man who trained me? The white-haired toad sage said, looking at the elderly male figure in front of him. Hiruzen smiled when he heard this and looked at the younger figure in front of him. The two's thoughts then came to an end when they heard a knock on the door. However, before either one of them could say anything, the masked figure known throughout Konoha as the copy ninja walked into the room. Yo, what's up? Kakashi asked, looking at the two males. Good, now that you're here we can officially get started, Jiraiya said, looking at the two male figures in front of him. When he said this, the two of them nodded and took seat opposite of each other while Jiraiya was in the middle and off to the side. So what is it that Kakashi may or may not know about? Hiruzen asked, looking at his former student. First things first, Hiruzen, how long do you think this has been going on? Jiraiya asked, looking at the elderly man. When he asked this, the great ninja didn't know how to respond and simply shrugged his shoulders before responding. A few years maybe. When the other two heard this, they sighed and looked at the elderly man. I wish I could tell you that was the case, however the reality of the situation is not what we would like to believe, Jiraiya said, looking at the male figure to his right. Indeed, as Jiraiya said, this has been going on much longer than just a few years. In fact, this conspiracy has been going on for close to 20 years, Kakashi said, looking at the male in front of him. I see. Well, that is some rather alarming news, Hiruzen said as he put his head down for a moment trying to process the newfound information. After he had thought about it, he sighed and looked at the two men. Well, what all do we know? Hiruzen asked, looking at the two men. Well, as you know, Danzo has his own version of the Anbu called the Root Agents, Jiraiya said, looking at the eldest man in the room. Yes, of course, Hiruzen said, looking at the two of them. To put it simply, these agents are not normal. Sure, they seem normal enough, and to an extent they are normal. Years ago they used to be normal humans that just undergone extreme training so that they were loyal to Danzo. However, as the years passed and as Danzo grew more and more paranoid, he had some of his researchers start working on a new genjutsu, one that doesn't just affect the mind, Jiraiya said, looking at him, to which the elderly man's eyes grew wide with surprise. One that doesn't just affect the mind? How is that possible? Hiruzen asked, looking at the two males in front of him. We don't know yet, but we do know that in order to perform the technique, two different people must be present during this. A genjutsu master and a fuinjutsu master must be the ones to perform the genjutsu, which is why it is so hard to detect in the first place, Jiraiya said, looking at Hiruzen. I see, so Danzo intends to harm Konoha? Hiruzen asked, looking at the two of them. It's hard to tell what his real motives are at the moment, however I am sure of one thing. He doesn't plan to harm Konoha, or at least not directly. He's not satisfied with his position on the civilian council and wants to be Hokage, Jiraiya said, looking at him. I see, why would he want to be Hokage? Surely he could obtain the same results that he wanted just by taking it with brute force. Hiruzen said, looking at the males in front of him. After some time thinking about, I believe I have figured out why he is acting in secret instead of acting on impulse, Kakashi said, looking at the two elderly males in front of him. After a moment of silence, the copycat ninja finally spoke. If he were to take what he wanted by brute force, it would lead to several people fleeing. Some of the people that leave may end up in other ninja villages. If this happens, then they will without a doubt think that he is planning to do the same to their villages if he was willing to do it to his own. Kakashi said, looking at them. And if they found out about this, it would lead to another village or perhaps even several villages teaming up against Konoha to destroy him, Hiruzen said as he finally understood where Kakashi was going. Indeed, which needless to say would make the past 20 years of planning pointless, Kakashi said, looking at the male figures in front of him. Yes, that makes sense, however that still doesn't explain why he wants to become Hokage, Hiruzen said, looking at the two of them. That matter has a very simple answer, my friend. It's because the Hokage holds all the power, Jiraiya said, looking at him. The Hokage can manipulate certain factors to work out in his favor. The Hokage is the only one that can both make and terminate laws as they see fit. However, this is usually looked down upon because the civilian council usually add their input, Jiraiya said, looking at him. Yes, however, the Hokage also has the ability to choose who is on the civilian council and who is to be rejected. So if Danzo were to become Hokage, Kakashi said, looking at the elderly figure waiting for him to see where he was going. He'd be able to make the civilian council members that have allied themselves with him, or even worse, he could make the civilian council people that he has placed under this new genjutsu he has developed, Hiruzen said, looking at them. Exactly, so you can see why at the moment you'll have to stay on your toes, Jiraiya said, looking at his former teacher. Yes, and I appreciate you telling me this, Hiruzen said, looking at them. When he said this, he got up and was about to shunshin away. However, before he did, Jiraiya looked at him. Hiruzen, before you go, I just want you to know that no matter what you think at the moment, the civilian council are by no means your friends, Jiraiya said before the old man disappeared from the room. When he left the room, the silver-haired male looked at the toad sage. Why didn't you tell him that Naruto is still alive? The male asked, looking at the white-haired male. As much as it pains me to say this, leaving this village was probably the best thing Naruto could have done, Jiraiya said, looking at Kakashi. Oh, and why's that? Kakashi asked, looking at Jiraiya. Naruto left this village for a reason. While I'm not sure about the details, from what I gather from his last day here was just horrible. Now here's a question for you, Kakashi. If every day of his life was half as bad as that day was, why on earth would I tell Hiruzen? What good would it do Naruto? If I told Hiruzen, he'd just send more men out and bring him back to the village. He'd bring him back to a life that he hated. Why on earth would I want to sentence my godson to that kind of fate? Jiraiya asked, looking at the silver-haired figure in front of him. After a few moments of silence, Kakashi sighed in defeat and looked at the male in front of him. You're right, it wouldn't do him any good, Kakashi said, looking at him. The silver-haired male then got up and walked towards the door, but before he left, he looked at the male that was still in the room. Then, at least, tell him when you think he can handle it. After all, he, unlike most of this village, did care for Naruto. He cared a lot more than anyone else did, so even if you don't tell him now, I believe he still needs to know the truth. Kakashi said as he opened the door and walked out into the streets of Konoha. Left alone to himself, the white-haired male sighed and began to think to himself. I guess it's true. If nothing else, he doesn't have to learn the truth now, but he still deserves to know. I guess I can tell him when the time comes. When he, like me, understands that leaving this place was the best thing he could have done. It's almost kind of sad, really. If he had just had one friend, one person to take some of the weight that he had been carrying around with off his shoulders, he might not have left. Jiraiya thought as he looked at the ceiling. I wonder what he's doing now. Jiraiya asked in his head before he let out a long sigh. With Naruto and Fu, the two were standing in the hallway with two books in each hand. Their arms were perfectly extended and the two were starting to feel just a little sore. Why were they doing this? Because it was a punishment. Fu had asked a question in class, and seeing as how she was a Jinchuriki and a rather hated one in this particular village, she was sent outside. Naruto, being the young boy he is, tried to stand up for his newfound friend, and when he did, he was also ordered to stand outside the classroom. Stupid teacher, this doesn't even make any sense. Why is he having us do this? Naruto asked aloud in a slightly annoyed tone. It's fine, Naruto, it's because I asked a question that I shouldn't have asked. It's my fault we're in this mess, Fu said, looking down at the ground. When Naruto heard this, he gritted his teeth and looked at her. How can she say this is her fault? It's not her fault, it's that stupid teacher's fault. I thought she had a good question. I didn't get what he was talking about either. They're treating her like they treated me. Naruto then found himself slightly depressed as he looked at Fu. Naruto then walked over to Fu and took the books from her hands and placed them on top of his own. Naruto, what are you doing? Fu asked, looking at him. What's it look like? I'm going to carry your books for you, Naruto stated as he took her books and walked back over to his spot. Naruto, you don't have to do that, I can. Fu didn't get the chance to finish her sentence as Naruto interrupted her. Fu, it's fine, here's the way I see things. You don't deserve to be out here. You asked a question and I talked back to the teacher. I do deserve to be out here. It wouldn't be fair for you to get punished for something you didn't do, Naruto said, looking at her. Fu once again looked as if she was going to say something, however, Naruto once again cut her off. Look, Fu, I don't know how this village has been treating you and I don't care. As long as I'm around, I'm going to try and make your life easier, Naruto said, looking at her. Fu then looked at Naruto a little surprised before she nodded with a smile. Thanks, Naruto, the green-haired female said as she just sat there and watched him hold the books. He's so much nicer and more understanding than the others are. I wonder why that is. I guess it really doesn't matter, and Naruto, just as you're going to make my life easier, I'll try my best to make yours easier as well, Fu thought as she looked at the blonde in front of her. The blonde that had become well known throughout Tokigakure as the demon lover, as well as many other names, let out a tired yawn as he rose from his bed. When he did, he looked around and got up to his feet rather slowly. He then made his way over to the mirror that was in the room and looked down at the headband he had received yesterday. It was neatly folded just the way he had left it, but there was also a folded piece of paper beside it. The blonde reached down and unfolded it, and his eyes slowly began to go over the words that were on the paper in front of him. I got tired of trying to wake you up, so when you read this you may want to hurry and get to the academy. Naruto's eyes widened at this slightly and looked around the room for the clock. When his eyes landed on the device that was hanging on the wall, he darted to his closet and opened it up, throwing on his shirt and clothes in a hasty fashion, realizing that he only had 10 minutes before the teams were announced. When he realized this, he quickly put on whatever pair of clothes he could find and started to run down the streets of Tokigakure. Usually, him and Fu would be on the roofs, but seeing as how it was still early in the morning, no one was on the streets just yet, and seeing as how the villagers tended to blame the two of them for pretty much anything, he didn't want to wake someone up then have to listen to them complain about it the rest of the day. When he arrived in front of the academy, he saw that Fu was already there waiting for him in front of the massive building. It's about time you got here, the green-haired female said, looking at him. I would have been here sooner if someone had woken me up like they said they would, Naruto said, looking at the green-haired female. Like my note said, I tried to wake you up and you wouldn't. Also, I noticed that you were smiling in your sleep, so it didn't really feel right to wake you up from a dream that you were clearly enjoying, Fu said as the two of them walked into the classroom. Yeah, I don't really remember anything about the dream, but for whatever reason I just remember that it was a really nice dream, Naruto said as he looked at the green-haired female in front of him. Oh well, that's okay then. The two of them then stopped in front of the door where all the students that passed were supposed to meet up at. Fu then sighed and stepped forward. Let's just get this over with, Fu said as she turned back around to look at Naruto. The blonde then nodded at her and stepped forward. The two then stepped into the classroom, and when they did, the two of them were almost instantly greeted with stares. Alright, now that the final two are here, we can finally get started with team placement, the teacher said as he looked at the students in front of him. Naruto and Fu waited patiently for their name to be called, and each time the two of them grew more and more nervous hearing each team that was called out. What if I'm not on Fu's team? I somehow doubt that the other two that she gets paired up with will be as understanding as I am. Not only that, but then she'll have 3 people against her and not one person on her side. It'd make becoming a good ninja that much harder for her. Naruto thought to himself as he heard the male finish team placement for Team 6. The teacher continued to read off the names for the next team, and little did Naruto know that Fu had also started to worry about the exact same topic his mind was on at the moment. What if I'm not on Naruto's team? The others will defiantly take out a lot of their frustrations out on him because he hangs out with me. They'll do things to him that he doesn't deserve, and chances are that the sensei he gets will most likely also hate him because of me. They'll interfere with his performance and he won't ever advance past Genin level, Fu thought to herself as the male in front of her continued to list Team 8. And finally, for Team 12 we have Naruto Uzumaki, Shiro Ito, and Fu. Your team shall be led by Goro Hachiro, the male said looking at the class. When he said this, it made the two that had until now been worried about their team. The two of them then watched as several different older men and women came into the room announcing who they were and left with 3 newly announced shinobi. It eventually got to the point to where there were only 6 students left in the class. However, 2 familiar figures that Naruto recognized walked into the room. A man carrying a sake bottle in his hand and a woman with long blonde hair that came to the back of her knees. I'm just saying, wouldn't be late if you didn't stop for another bottle of sake, the female said looking at the male in front of him. For the 100th time in the past minute, I'm sorry. I can't help it that this old body of mine has urges, after all, I'm only human, the male said looking at the female. Sorry for being late, I had to go and babysit this mess again, the blonde female said gesturing to the male that was beside her. The male sighed when he saw his counterpart do this and looked at the 6 students that were left. Well, I'm Goro Hachiro. Would the 3 of you that got placed in my squad please follow me, the man said as he walked outside. Fu and Naruto stood up, and when they did they saw that a male in front of them had also stood up. They assumed that this was the 3rd member of their team. He had a pale complexion, snow-white hair, and blue eyes that seemed to remind the 2 of them of ice. The 3 of them followed their new instructor out of the academy building and down the streets of Takigakure. They stopped when they came to a place that none of the 3 recognized. The male walked into the building and the 3 followed closely behind him. Goro then sat down at a round table and the 3 younger figures sat in front of him. Well, let's get this over with. This is a mandatory exercise called Team Introduction. So go ahead, tell me about yourself, the male said as a waitress brought him a bottle of sake. The elder male looked at the bottle and sighed. He took a rather large drink of the bottle and then looked at the 3 in front of him. Why haven't you started yet? Goro asked looking at the 3 of them. Well, it's just we don't exactly know what to talk about, Shiro said looking at the elder figure in front of him. Basic information, you know what you like, what you hate, dreams for the future, hobbies, you know stuff like that, Goro said looking at the 3 of them. Mind giving us an example? Fu asked looking at the male. The male then sighed and looked at them. I suppose not. My name is Goro Hachiro. I like sake or pretty much any other alcoholic drink. To be honest, I'm not too fond of a certain blonde who's always on my case about tedious tasks. I guess I really don't have any dreams for the future, it's too much trouble to think about stuff like that. As for my hobbies, I guess it would be going to different bars and trying different types of drinks, the gray-haired male said looking at them. After a moment of silence, the white-haired male finally decided to speak up. Alright, I guess I'll go first. My name is Shiro Ito. I like being outdoors and certain types of manga. I hate a certain 2 people that live in this village as well as everything they've ever done. My plan for the future is to make their life a living hell, and as for my hobbies, I guess I don't really have any, Shiro said looking at the male in front of him. When Naruto heard this, he clenched his fists and looked at the white-haired male. He's talking about me and Fu, and to make matters worse he does it right in front of us, Naruto thought to himself looking at the white-haired male. I'll go next, the blonde heard the green-haired member of his team say, which brought him back to reality. My name is Fu. I like people that treat others fairly, and I hate people who single others out and make them feel unwanted. My dream for the future is to have lots of friends and for everyone to see me for who I am, not what I am. As for hobbies, I guess I like training and going for walks, Fu said as she sat down. Okay, so that only leaves you, Guro said as he looked at the blonde in front of him. Huh, oh right. Well, my name is Naruto Uzumaki. I like helping others and making people feel wanted. I hate people who have no respect for others as well as people who make others feel useless. My dream for the future is to help people realize that they're wrong for judging others because of their past or things that they can't control. As for my hobbies, I like spending time with my friends and I love eating new types of food, Naruto said looking at the male in front of him. Okay. Those are relatively realistic goals, I guess. Well, tomorrow we're going to have our first training exercise. I want each of you to meet me at training ground number 14. I also wouldn't eat anything tomorrow if I were you, otherwise you'll have a bad time, Guro said looking at the three figures in front of him. Naruto was about to ask him a question, but before he could, the male in front of him disappeared in a cloud of smoke. As soon as he did, Shiro got up and looked at the two beside him. I'll see the two of you tomorrow, I guess, he said as he walked out of the building. When he did, Naruto looked at Fu and the two of them walked out of the building. Well, that was rather unexpected, don't you think? Fu asked looking at Naruto. Which part, the training exercise or the part where Shiro insulted us in the most obvious manner? Naruto asked looking at the female beside him. Oh, so you noticed that too, huh? Fu asked looking at Naruto. How could I not notice it? It was as plain as day who he was talking about. It doesn't take a genius to figure out who he was talking about. Naruto said looking at the female beside him. Yeah, well, want to just go home then? Fu asked looking at Naruto. Yeah, might as well. After all, we need to be ready for tomorrow, Fu said looking at the blonde beside her. They then walked to the house that the two of them shared and got ready for the following day. When the two of them decided that they had everything that they needed, they walked into the rooms that the two of them had. As the two slowly drifted off into the land of dreams, they began to wonder exactly what the two of them would have to do. Then the two of them slowly fell into the darkness that was sleep. Then, like usual, Fu had woken up much earlier than Naruto had and she went to take a shower. While she was in there, she remembered that she and Naruto, as well as the third member of their team, were supposed to meet up today. When she finally exited the bathroom, she put on her usual attire and walked to Naruto's room. She looked at the blonde and saw that, like the previous day, he was sleeping peacefully, but deciding that she wasn't going to be as nice today, placed her hands on his back and pushed him into the floor. With a solid thud, the blonde woke up and looked at the figure in his room. What time is it? Naruto asked, letting out a tired yawn. Almost time for us to meet up with our team, so get ready, Fu said looking at Naruto. The blonde got up and stretched when he heard this and walked toward his bathroom where he took a shower and then came out. He then looked at Fu, who was standing by the door waiting for him. Alright, you ready to go? Fu asked looking at the blonde in front of her, and when she did, she received a nod of the head. The two then began to walk down the street and arrived at a fenced-off area. When they did, the two of them jumped over the fence and began to walk into the field. Once they got there, they saw that the white-haired male was already there waiting for them. The two slowly walked over to him, and when they were about a foot away, Shiro got a little nervous, then looked at the two of them. The white-haired male began only to have gotten cut off by a sound that he was familiar with. When he heard this sound, him as well as the two that were in front of him jumped to the side and looked at where they were standing, only to see that there were several kunai in the ground where they were standing. The three of them pulled out a kunai and looked around. When they did, they saw a figure appear in front of them. This figure, however, made both Naruto and Fu very nervous. This figure was wearing a white mask that looked like a dog and had a leaf village symbol on the forehead. I'd like for the three of you to come with me, he said looking at them. No way, Naruto said looking at the male figure in front of him. Well, I wasn't really giving you choice. the cloaked figure said as he ran forward, and the three that were in front of him also ran forward. Shiro was the first of the three to attack by throwing a kunai at the male. The male easily caught it and returned it to the white-haired male. Shiro jumped out of the way and looked at the male that Fu and Naruto were now locked in close combat with. The two of them tried repeatedly to land a hit on him but never could. However, the fight was short-lived as the masked figure jumped back slightly, causing the two figures in front of him to stop. When they did, he struck the back of their necks rather forcefully and the two then hit the ground. Shiro looked at the figure that was in front of him and sighed. "Now it's your turn," the masked figure said, looking at him. Shiro threw his kunai on the ground and looked at the figure in front of him. "I give up," Shiro said, looking at him. "Oh, why the sudden change of mind?" the cloaked figure asked, looking at the white-haired male in front of him. "The three of us all had a chance of beating you, but seeing as it's just me now, I know for a fact I can't beat you. It'd be better to just give up now instead of fighting you. There'd be no point in it," Shiro said, looking at the male in front of him. "I see, a wise choice," the cloaked figure said as he disappeared. "But foolish nonetheless," Shiro heard the male say behind him, and then felt a heavy pressure on the back of his neck, and him too fell to the ground and watched as his world slowly faded to nothingness. When Shiro finally awoke, he saw that Naruto and Fu were also awake. He tried to move, but when he did, he found his arms tied behind his back and his feet both tied together. Shiro tried to move once again, but he felt some more resistances, suggesting that something was holding the rope that was on his feet and the rope that was around his hands together. When he looked back over to Naruto and Fu, he saw that they were in the position he was in. "So he got you too?" Naruto asked, looking at Shiro. "Something like that, yeah," Shiro said, looking at the two in front of him. "Well, guess this is the end for the Team 12. Man, to think we didn't even get to have our first mission. Not exactly how I pictured I'd die," Shiro said, looking at them. However, when he said this, he noticed that neither of them said anything back, causing him to sigh. After a few more moments of silence had passed, Shiro finally decided to speak up once again. "It's not you," he said in a quiet voice. "What?" Naruto asked, looking at the white-haired male in front of him. "The two people in this village I hate. It's not the two of you," Shiro said, looking at the ground. "When I was walking home yesterday, I saw that the villagers were staring at the two of you like you had the plague or something. I had never actually seen the demon of this village or the demon lover of this village, so I had no idea it was the two of you. So after I thought about it, I probably sounded like the two people I hated were the two of you," Shiro said, looking at them. "Well then, if it's not us, then who is it?" Fu asked, looking at the white-haired male. "Believe it or not, it's my parents," Shiro said, looking at them. When he said this, however, Naruto and Fu gained a confused look on their face, and Shiro decided to clarify what he meant. "My name's Shiro Ito, as in the heir to the Ito Corporation," Shiro said, looking at them. "I thought that name sounded familiar. Although that doesn't explain why you hate your family," Fu said, looking at the male in front of her. "To put it simply, they don't even know I exist. Being the heir of a company like the Ito Corporation is just too much to handle. Every day they expected more and more of me, and every time I messed up on even the smallest detail, they shunned me. Then came the day I told them I wanted to be a ninja, and things just took an even worse turn. I decided for a while that they were right and that becoming a ninja would be a waste of time," Shiro said, looking at them. "So what happened for you to change your mind?" Naruto asked, looking at them. "I don't know, maybe I was tired of being ignored, or maybe I just didn't want to be responsible for such a big company, but I snapped and left. After the day I left, they completely shunned me and cut me off. According to the letters that they always send me, I'm not even in their will anymore. They're going to give anything they own to a business partner that they have," Shiro said, looking at them. "I still don't understand why you apologized, though," Fu said, looking at the white-haired male in front of her. "I know what it's like to be unappreciated by those you care about, and even though you two don't care about me, I still felt as if it was wrong to go on letting the two of you think that I was talking about the two of you were in reality. Nothing was further from the truth. I guess it's a bit late to tell you this now, seeing as how we're all probably going to die, but oh well, it's like they say, die with a clear conscience, Shiro said, looking at them. When he said this to Fu, it seemed like just another sad story, but for Naruto it was a little deeper to him, and as he looked at the white-haired male in front of him, he began to think to himself. He left because he was tired of being unappreciated. He left because he didn't want to go unnoticed anymore. He left his home for the same reason I left my home, Naruto thought to himself as he looked at the male. However, their conversation was cut short when they heard footsteps. I see that all of you are awake. Now we can really get started, the male said, looking at the three of them. The male then walked over to the white-haired male and took out a kunai. When he did, he cut his restraints and handed him a kunai. Shiro looked at it a little confused until the male grabbed Naruto and held a kunai to his neck. Shiro, I'm giving you a choice. You can kill Fu and Naruto lives, or you can spare Fu, but if you do, I'll kill Naruto. This is a choice that you are being forced to make now. Make a choice and make it quick, otherwise I might just get bored and kill both of them, the male said, looking at him. The white-haired male just stood there motionless, looking at Naruto and the kunai in his hand. The only way to Naruto is to kill Fu, but at the same time, the only way to save Fu is to let him kill Naruto. Then there's the possibility that he'll just kill Naruto after I kill Fu. What do I do? Guess it's time to put some of my company skills to use, Shiro thought, looking at the male. Let's compromise, Shiro said, looking at the male in front of him. That wasn't one of the options, the male said, drawing the blade closer to Naruto's throat. I know, but lowlifes like you are always willing to compromise. Especially when there's money involved, right? Shiro said, looking at the male in front of him. Things like money don't interest me, the male said, looking at him. Then what about weapons? I happen to know that the Ito Corporation is shipping a rather large supply of weapons to the Land of Fire in just a few days. If you know what you're doing, you could not only obtain more weapons for yourself but for the friends that I'm almost certain you have just hidden away, Shiro said, looking at the male. A very tempting offer, but my master would not be pleased if I did such things without his permission, so I'm going to have to pass on this offer, the male said, looking at Shiro. When the white-haired male heard this, he once again became silent and looked at the male in front of him. Damn it! What the hell kind of lowlife is this guy? He's not taking any of my offers. Wait, he said his master wouldn't be, please. Which mean that he's being paid somehow, even if it's not with money. Let's exploit that just a bit, shall we? Shiro thought as he looked at the man in front of him. So what's your master paying you with? If not money, then surely it's some form of insurance, right? I'm sure we could provide the same level of what he's offering, and if not, then we'll make you an even better offer. Sound like a deal? Shiro asked, looking at the male. I'm not comfortable telling you any of this information. Now quit stalling for time and make a decision now. The male said, looking at him. Shiro grew nervous when he heard this and looked at Naruto. Okay, let me think about what my father said about this type of situation. He said that whenever someone is doing something like this, they're trying to deal a crippling blow that is more severe than any other option. In other words, he knows that Naruto and Fu are both stronger than me, which means that if they were both to live, they would have a much higher chance of living than I would with either of them, Shiro thought as he looked at the male in front of him. Well, if nothing else, at least, change the choice just a bit, Shiro said, looking at the male in front of him. I really don't want to. The masked figure started, only to be cut off. Take my life instead, Shiro suddenly yelled out, causing the two figures that were on his team to widen their eyes slightly. Instead of you killing Naruto and me killing Fu, how about you kill me and let the two of them live? Shiro asked, looking at the male figure in front of him. The male figure then dashed towards him and held the kunai to his throat. Is that really what you want? The masked figure asked, looking at the figure in front of him. Shiro started to sweat slightly before he took a deep breath and looked at the male in front of him. Yes, he answered calmly. Then I have just one thing to say to the three of you, he said as he backed away from them. The male then took off his mask and showed a familiar scared face with gray hair. The three of you pass. What? Naruto asked a little confused. Each Jonin squad leader has to test their Genin squad to see if they really have what it takes to be shinobi. I came up with the hardest test I could think of so that no one would pass, but the three of you somehow did everything correctly. Neither one of the captives said anything that could endanger their life or the life of their comrades, and the person who was given the choice prolonged the choice as long as he could, and when everything else failed offered himself up so that his comrades could live. Never thought anyone from the academy would be able to pass this test, Guro said looking at them. So this was all some kind of test? Fu asked looking at the elder male in front of her. Yeah, the male said pulling out a bottle of sake from his jacket. And we passed? Naruto asked looking at him. Yep, Guro said taking a large drink of sake. Much better now I'm not sober anymore, the male said looking at his team. The three young figures then jumped into the air and let out screams of excitement. Man, something tells me that dealing with the three of them is going to take a lot of sake, Guro said looking at the three in front of him. Alright, well, tomorrow Team 12 has its first official mission. We'll meet in front of Shibuki office. I hope the three of you are ready, because from here on out it's only going to get tougher and you'll find yourself regretting so many choices. So from here on out make sure you do your best, the male said looking at them. Guro then watched as the three of them walked away. He then heard someone land beside him and turned to his side to see a familiar blonde looking at him. So did they fail? She asked looking at the male looking at him. No, actually, even though I planned everything out, they still came out on top. They passed, Guro said looking at them. Looks like your days of slacking are over because you officially have a genin team to take care of, the blonde said looking at the male in front of her with a smug look on her face. Yeah, although it isn't going to be easy for them. If what Shiro said was true, then soon he really is going to have to make a difficult choice. I just hope he does what's right and makes the choice that will make him happy, Guro said looking at him. I'm sure he will. You know, he reminds me of his uncle at that age, the blonde said looking at him. Was I really that annoying as a kid? Guro asked looking at the blonde female. Yeah, but you were fun back then. So when do you plan on telling him? The blonde asked looking at him. I'll tell him when the time is right. But for now, I think I'll save him from the heartache of seeing what a mess his uncle has become, Guro said looking at the blonde female beside him. The two newly announced genin known as Naruto and Fu were currently wearing white aprons and had a few small spots of paint on their clothes and few that had managed to get on their clothes. Hey brat, you missed a spot, a male said looking at the green-haired female that was currently on a ladder. Where? Fu asked looking at the male. When she asked this, the male smiled and took the water house that he had been holding and sprayed the side of the building with some paint that was at the moment still wet. There, the male said with a slight chuckle. Fu sighed and looked at the spot that the male had sprayed and moved the ladder that she had been on over to the spot. Naruto gritted his teeth when he saw this but decided to say nothing. Fu placed the ladder beside the spot that she had just painted over and started to replace the coat that she had done. The male looked like he was going to spray Fu with the house until a door behind the male opened. Sir, you have a call, the white-haired male that formed the third genin of Team 12 said as he walked through the door. Shiro at the moment was wearing a very formal suit and hated it immensely because it reminded him of when he had to go attend meetings with his father. Alright, the male said as he walked into the house. Fu then sighed and looked at the wall. Maybe if I get this done quickly I can help Naruto with his side of the house, Fu thought as she began to do her side a little faster than when the male was outside. She then heard the familiar voice of Shiro call out to her. Hey Fu, catch, Shiro said looking at her. Fu turned her head and saw that there were two tin cans coming at her. She caught it and looked at Shiro. What's this? Fu asked looking at him. It's for you and Naruto. I took it out of his fridge when he wasn't looking. I suggest you hide them before he comes back and accuses you of stealing, Shiro said looking at her. This caused the blonde that was on the far side of the house to smile. Thanks, Shiro, we owe you one, Naruto said looking at him. Don't mention it, Shiro said as he opened the door. However, before he could step into the house, the female of the team spoke up. Oh, and Shiro, could you do me a favor? Fu asked, looking at him. Sure. What is it? Shiro asked, looking at her. Mind spitting in one of his cups when he's not looking? Fu asked, looking at him. He's been treating me like his own personal butler for the past 3 days. Trust me, when I get the chance, I'm going to do more than just spit in it, Shiro said with just a hint of evil in his eye. Thanks, Shiro, Fu said as the male walked into the house and shut the door behind him. At this rate though, we'll never get done. This is the last wall that we need to paint, and without Goro around to keep him from harassing us, we aren't going to be able to finish this wall, Fu thought, looking at the place she was painting. As soon as she thought this, the male walked out of the house and looked at them. I have to go somewhere. I trust that the three of you can finish this while I'm gone, the male said, looking at them, although he didn't wait for them to answer as he walked out into the streets. A few moments later, Goro appeared in a puff of smoke with a cell phone in his hand. That should keep him busy for a little bit, Goro said as he put the phone away. Now if you don't mind hurrying up, Shibuki said he wants to talk to us about something after we got finished with this mission, Goro said, which caused the three of them to light up slightly. Give me a minute and I'll help, Shiro said as he walked back into the house, and within a minute the male walked back outside with a white apron that said, "Kiss the cook." Shiro then climbed up the ladder that Naruto was on and saw that he was looking at him with a slight smile. I'm sure he won't mind me using it, the male said, looking at the blonde. The three of them were able to finish the mission that three of them had been assigned within an hour without the elder male's constant harassment. Alright, we're done, Goro-sensei, now let's go to Shibuki's office, Naruto said, looking at the white-haired male in front of him. The three younger figures then started to walk towards the huge tree that was in the center of their village and began to walk up the large set of stairs. When the three went through the door, they saw that Goro was already in the room and that Shibuki looked surprisingly serious. Ah, that three of you are here. Now I assume that the missions have been rather interesting, because of the villagers, Shibuki said, looking at them. Yeah, interesting is one way to put it, Fu said, looking at the male in front of her. I see. Well, I thought that this may happen and wanted to apologize to the three of you for it. So I've done some thinking and come up with what I believe a good apology is, Shibuki said, looking at them. When he said this, the three gained a slightly curious look, causing Shibuki to smile. I've decided to give the three of you along with another team an A-class mission, Shibuki said, looking at them. This caused the three that were in front of him to all gain a confused look and then a very excited express. After the three of them had a small celebration and had settled down, Shibuki looked at them and smiled. Alright, so the other team that you will be doing this mission with is Team 7 from Konoha. Your goal is to investigate some rumors about a bandit that plans to use the hero's water, Shibuki said, looking at them. Alright, well, you can count on us, Fu said, looking at him. Yeah, we won't let you down, Naruto said with a smile on his face. Alright, well, you'll be leaving tomorrow morning. It will be a guarding mission, so you will be there for a week until a new team shows up to take your place. Team 7 is already here and is currently in the village, however, chances are you won't meet them until the morning. That being said, make sure that you have everything that you need for tomorrow, Shibuki said, looking at them. The three then nodded and left. When the three left, Goro looked at the male in front of him and sighed. I still don't think they're ready, Goro said, looking at them. Maybe you're right, maybe I'm right. Either way, it's my call to make and I made it, Shibuki said, looking at the male. What if something goes wrong? Goro asked, looking at Shibuki. When the white-haired male said this, Shibuki sighed and leaned back in his desk. I understand why you're worried, I really do, but if Fu and Naruto can get this job done, then that will just give them that much more of a positive reputation. Being the only first-year genin team to complete an A-rank mission in this village will, at least, make the villagers somewhat differently. Plus with you and Aoi there, it shouldn't be too much for the two of you to handle, Shibuki said, looking at the male in front of him. Alright, if think it's the right call, I'll trust your judgment, but I just want to go on record by saying that I think this is a bad idea, Goro said, looking at him. Alright, well, Aoi's team has already been made aware of this and I think that you'll be able to gather all you need before tomorrow, Shibuki said looking at the mail in front of him. Yes sir, Goro said as he took the sake bottle out of his jacket and placed it on the table in front of him. Mind putting that somewhere safe until I get back? I'd rather not be drunk while on this mission, the white-haired male said as he walked out of the room. Shibuki smiled when he said this and took the bottle and placed it in a secret safe that he had under his desk. Nice to know that he cares enough about his nephew to make sure he doesn't die during this mission, Shibuki thought to himself as he watched the male walk out of the room. I just hope that Shiro will be more understanding than his father was at that age, Shibuki thought as he continued to fill out the small amount of paperwork he had left. With Fu and Naruto, the two of them were currently in their own rooms and were gathering everything that the two of them thought they would need for the mission that was ahead of them. Naruto sighed as he tried to place another kunai in his backpack and smiled when he finally managed to place it in the small pack. Naruto then smelled something that he hadn't smelled before. He followed the aroma into the kitchen and saw that Fu was placing a plate full of food on the table that the two of them almost never used. Fu, what's this? Naruto asked looking at the food in front of him. Oh well, I thought that since we were going to be gone for a while that I would make the two of something to eat so that we have plenty of energy for when we leave tomorrow, Fu said looking at the blonde in front of her. Well, it looks good and smells great, Naruto said looking at the plate of food in front of him, and he wasn't lying about he said the food that Fu had made looked amazing. Naruto was about to start eating when he noticed that Fu didn't make herself a plate. Fu, where's yours? Naruto asked looking at the green-haired female. Oh, we sort of ran out of supplies and I used the last of it to make this for you, Fu said looking to the side slightly embarrassed. Naruto looked at her slightly surprised and then looked down at the food. How about we share it then? Naruto offered looking at Fu. Oh no, I'd rather you eat it, I mean, Fu began only for Naruto to cut her off. I don't want to hear it, Fu. I can't eat this knowing that you won't have anything to eat, so unless we're sharing it I'm not going to eat it, Naruto said looking at her. Fu sighed at this, she had forgotten how childish Naruto could be sometimes. Alright Naruto, we'll share it, Fu said as she got one of the spare seats that he had for any guests that they may have and pulled it closer to him. Naruto smiled at this and picked up a small amount of food before pushing it towards her slightly. Open up, Naruto said looking at her. I can feed myself, Naruto, Fu said looking at him a bit annoyed. I know, but at least this way I know you're actually getting enough to eat, Naruto said looking at her. Fu sighed and leaned forward slightly with a slight blush on her face and took the food from the two pieces of wood that Naruto was holding. Naruto smiled at this, then took a bite of his own, and when he did his eyes lit up with how good it tasted. This really is amazing, Fu, Naruto said as he got another bite ready for the female he lived with. You really think so? Fu asked as she once again took a bite from the blonde, only this time, the blush had faded from her face. Yeah, this is amazing, you one day you're going to make someone an awesome wife, Naruto said without thinking, and once he had realized what he said his own face turned red. He then looked over at Fu, whose face was also slightly red. I mean that as if you ever get married. No, wait, that's not what I meant, I mean if, Naruto began only to get cut off halfway through his apology. It's fine, I know what you meant, Fu said looking at him. Oh okay, Naruto said offering Fu another bite of the food she had made. She took it and within a minute between the two of them the plate full of food was gone. Let's go to bed, Fu said looking at Naruto. Okay, Naruto said as he and the green-haired female walked up the stairs. The two of them walked to their separate rooms and shut the door behind them. Naruto had changed into the clothes that he slept in. He was about to go to sleep when he heard some light tapping on his window. When he looked to his side to see what was there, he saw a few raindrops going down his window. It was raining, no real surprise there, it rained a lot more in water country than it did in other places. Naruto decided to ignore this and crawled into bed. It was about halfway through the night when the storm started to become more powerful. A bolt of lightning struck by the park and the resulting crash startled the two awake. Ah! Fu yelled as she shot up from the bed she was laying in. She then looked outside and saw another flash of lightning followed by a much quieter sound of thunder. Great, it's a storm. I hate storms, they always wake me up and I can never get back to sleep, Fu said looking out the window. She then sighed and began to walk towards her door. Maybe Naruto's awake, Fu said as she opened the door and began to walk down the hall. Little did she realize that Naruto had the same problem with her. He had awoken in a very startled state and looked out the window to see that the storm had gotten far worse than it was when he had gone to sleep. A storm? Don't get many of those, Naruto said as he saw a flash of light and heard a low rumbling sound. Well, sleeping in something like this is going to be difficult, Naruto said looking out the window. The blonde then received a knock on his door and he turned to it. Come in, Fu, Naruto said looking at the door. How do you know it was me? Fu asked as she entered the room. We're the only ones that live here, Naruto said looking at her. Fair enough. So Naruto, mind if I stay in here with you for a little bit? Fu asked looking at the mail. Sure thing, something tells me I'm not going to be able to get back to sleep for quite some time anyway, Naruto said looking at her, and as if to prove his point another loud roar of thunder filled the house. Fu walked over to Naruto a bit faster than usual when she heard this. Scared of storms? Naruto asked looking at the green-haired female. A light shade of red appeared on her cheeks as he said this and she looked away from him. Maybe, she said avoiding his gaze. Really? Naruto asked a bit surprised. I didn't know that. I mean, we used to get storms a lot more often when we were younger and I don't remember you being scared of them back then. So why are you scared of them now? Naruto asked looking at Fu. Well, you used to be a real heavy sleeper and we shared the same bed, so you didn't notice when we were little, but at night when we had a storm I would use you as a hug pillow, Fu said looking at Naruto. A hug pillow? Naruto asked looking at the green-haired female in front of him. Yeah, hug pillows are used for people who are scared or upset. It's supposed to help them feel better, Fu said looking at Naruto, her face turning an even deeper shade of red. Naruto's face reflected this action and he looked at the ground. That's right, we used to share a bed back then, Naruto said still looking at the ground. Yeah, guess we were strange kids, Fu said looking at Naruto. I guess you could call us that, Naruto said as he finally averted his gaze from the floor to her. As he looked at her, another bolt of lightning struck and a loud roar of thunder followed behind it. Naruto noticed the Fu tensed up slightly at this. I guess she wasn't kidding when she said that she was scared. Guess it's not a bad thing, everyone's got something they're scared of, right? Naruto thought to himself. Hey Fu, you know, if you want you can use me as a hug pillow again, Naruto said looking at her. When he said this, Fu looked at him slightly surprised with a slight blush on her face. Naruto, I don't think that's, Fu began only for a loud roar of thunder to cut her off, and this time when it did the light that was on in Naruto's room went out. Without thinking, Fu suddenly lunged towards Naruto and wrapped both arms around him and buried her face in his chest. Naruto felt his face become much warmer and looked down at the green-haired female. Man, my heart's beating like crazy. I hope she can't hear it, Naruto thought as he looked down at her. He then realized that Fu was shaking slightly. He wasn't sure what to do in this situation. Sure, he had seen Fu upset before, but even as they were growing up he never seen her scared before. It was just a new situation and he had no idea what he was supposed to do in it. So he did the first thing that came to mind. He placed a hand on the back of the slightly shaking female in front of her and held her close. It's okay, Fu. There's no need to be scared because I'm here. I don't care if it's a storm, that ninja, or something even worse than them. You won't have to be scared of them because I'm here for you, Naruto said looking at the female. Oh, okay, thanks for being here for me, Fu said as she looked up at Naruto. Anytime, Naruto said looking at her with a slight blush. Hey Naruto, do you really think that I'd be a good wife? Fu asked avoiding the blonde's gaze. Yeah, why wouldn't you be? I mean, you're awesome to talk to you despite what everyone in this village thinks. You've got one of the kindest hearts I've ever seen, and in my own personal opinion you're not exact ugly, so why wouldn't you make a good wife? Naruto said, looking at the green-haired female beside him. Thanks, Naruto. I know it may not seem like it, but sometimes I'm not sure what I'd do if you weren't around, Fu said as she let her head rest on his chest. Naruto once again felt his heart speed up at this action. However, he soon felt his body relax into the feeling. After several moments of silence between the two had passed, another bolt of lightning struck and a loud roar of thunder came in behind it. Naruto felt his arms tighten around Fu out of pure instinct, but oddly enough he didn't feel her body tense up. He then looked down at the green-haired female in front of him. He then noticed that Fu's eyes were shut and that her face had a rather peaceful expression on her face. She actually looks really cute when she's asleep, Naruto thought to himself as he looked down at the female in front of him. Naruto's eyes then widened at his own thoughts and he shook his head slightly, trying to clear his head of the thoughts that had just filled his head. I can't think about Fu that way. We're best friends. It'd ruin our friendship, Naruto thought as he once again looked down at the female in front of him. Although, I guess it's not unusual that I'd think about her like that, right? Naruto thought to himself as he continued to look down at the female. I mean, we've been through so much together, and without her, I don't think that living here would be the same. I should probably ask someone about this, Naruto thought to himself as he looked down at the female in front of him. Naruto then reached his free hand around her and placed it under her legs and slowly lifted her up as to not disturb her sleeping. The blonde then got up and walked to the door. He once again began to think about something. I can't take Fu back to her room, she'd just wake up again. Then again, I can't just leave her in my room, can I? Naruto thought to himself, and he would have continued if Fu hadn't begun to move slightly in his arms. Naruto, the female said with her eyes still closed. Naruto felt his face heat up slightly at this and looked down at her. She's dreaming about me. She looks so happy, Naruto thought to himself as he looked at her. He then looked at the door in front of him, then turned slightly looking at his bed. He then looked at the door once more before he let out a small sigh and began to walk over to his bed. Naruto placed Fu down gently and covered her. Naruto, the green-haired female once again mumbled in her sleep. Naruto once again looked at her and smiled at this. He then leaned down and placed a gentle kiss on her forehead. When he did, he saw Fu smile in her sleep and a slight blush crosses her face. Naruto then quietly walked over to the other side of the bed and crawled in it. I guess sleeping together one night won't hurt anything, Naruto told himself as he also felt himself slowly start to drift off to sleep. However, just as he was about to, another flash of lightning struck the house and Naruto once again felt Fu tense up. Naruto, Fu once again said in her sleep, only this time, it sounded a little more panicked. Naruto turned around and looked at the sleeping female. He once again found himself in a situation where he wasn't sure what to do, so he once again did the first thing that came to mind. He slowly placed one of his arms around Fu's waist and brought himself closer to her so that his chest was touching her back. He once again felt relaxed at this. Naruto smiled at this but then let out a yawn. This is going to be really hard to explain in the morning, Naruto thought to himself as he slowly felt himself drift off to sleep. With Goro and Kakashi, where are those two? Goro questioned, becoming a little more irritated as time went on. They do know that we were supposed to meet at this gate, right? Shiro questioned, looking at the gray-haired male in front of him. Yeah, there's only 3 gates in the entire village and this one is the one that's used the most. There's no way they could have possibly gotten confused, Goro said, looking at the male. If I may, Kakashi said, gaining Goro's attention. I request permission to go look for them, Kakashi said, looking at him. Be my guest, Goro said, looking at him. Kakashi then did one of his trademark eye smiles before vanishing in a puff of smoke. If you don't mind me asking, just who are we waiting for? A pink-haired female that Goro recognized as the female of Team 7 asked, looking at him. Their names are Naruto and Fu, Guro said looking at them. When he said this, it caught the attention of a certain raven-haired male. Naruto. There's no way. It has to be a different Naruto, that's the only explanation, Sasuke thought as he looked at Guro. However, as time went on, Sasuke found himself becoming more and more annoyed by the fact that his name was Naruto and looked at the only non-genin that was with him. Excuse me, but what are their last names? Sasuke asked looking at him. Their last names? Guro asked looking at the raven-haired male, causing him to nod. Why on earth would he want to know their names? I guess there's no harm in it, still better to be safe than sorry, Guro thought as he looked at the male in front of him. Truth be told, they're both orphans they told have any last names, Guro said looking at him. Well, at least, this is half true, Fu doesn't have a last name, Guro thought as he looked at the male in front of him. Orphan, huh? This really is starting to sound like the Naruto that left Konoha. No, that's impossible, the Naruto that left Konoha died 3 weeks after he left, Sasuke thought to himself as he looked at the adult in front of him. Why do you want to know their last names, Sasuke-kun? The pink-haired female asked looking at him. I just thought it'd be better if we got an idea of who we're working with, Sasuke said looking at the pink-haired female. Oh, that's so smart, Sasuke-kun, Sakura said as she got much closer to the male. After a few more moments of silence, they saw 3 figures walking towards the gate. A white-haired male with his headband covering one of his eyes. A green-haired female with orange eyes with some white clothing that some may consider a little revealing. However, it was the third figure that caught Sasuke's attention. He had blonde hair and blue eyes. He may not have remembered much of what Naruto looked like, after all they were kids and Sasuke only ever saw Naruto 1 or 2 times before the day he helped Naruto leave the village. However, he had something that made him certain this was the Naruto he knew. He had 3 whiskers on either side of his face. Well, good job, Kakashi, I guess I underestimated you, Guro said looking at the male in front of him. He then turned his attention to the 2 figures in front of him. Mind telling me where the 2 of you were? Guro said looking at them. Let's just say that these 2 were getting to know each other, Kakashi said looking at the male in front of him, causing the 2 younger figures in front of him to blush and look away from each other slightly. Guro then looked at the silver-haired male in front of him and decided to just brush off what he had said. Alright, well, now that that's over, Team 12 of Takigakure, I'd like you all to meet the members of Team 7. Sai is the one with the bowl cut, the girl is Sakura and the guy wearing blue is Sasuke, Guro said looking at the 2 of them. When Naruto heard the name Sasuke, he looked around and found the male that he thought was the same boy who had helped him escape Konoha so many years ago. So that's Sasuke, huh? I'll have to remember to thank him before all of this is over, Naruto thought to himself as he looked at him. Yes, now it's our turn, Team 7, this is Team 12 of Konoha. They'll be helping us with guarding the hero's water. The blonde is Naruto, the girl of the 3 is Fu and the one with white hair is Shiro, Kakashi said looking at the 3 of them. Alright, now if you don't mind we better start moving. The sooner we get there, the sooner we can get this job done and the sooner we can leave, Guro said looking at them. Kakashi nodded and the 8 of them left the gates and began to walk down the path. The 4 members that made up Team 12 of Takigakure and the 4 that made up Team 7 of Konohagakure were walking around a small pond. The 2 eldest members of the group then approached each other. Have you spotted anything unusual? Guro asked looking at the male in front of him. No, I haven't seen anything ever since we got here, Kakashi said looking at Guro. I know it's a little strange. I think we may have been given some bad information, Guro said looking at Kakashi. It's possible, then again we still have a few days left. I wouldn't underestimate our opponents, it could be quite fatal, Kakashi said looking at him. Yeah, I guess you're right, Guro said looking at Kakashi. 3 men then walked up to the 2 of them. Who are you? Guro asked looking at each male closely. We're here to take your place while you and your teams go on break, one of the males said looking at them. Kakashi turned to his team when he heard this. Sakura, Sasuke, Sai, seems like we get breaks, you 3 can quit patrolling now, Kakashi said looking at them. Sakura sighed when she heard this and walked over to a nearby stump. I don't see how they all do it. The only one who seems to be out of breath beside me is Shiro, Sakura thought as she looked at her team and the team that she was currently working with. Naruto sat on a rock with Fu coming beside him and taking the seat next to him. Tired, Naruto? Fu asked, looking at the blonde. No, I'm not, but why not rest while we have the chance? Naruto said, looking at his green-haired friend. I guess you have a point, Fu said as she leaned back slightly. Naruto did not notice what the female had just done, decided to also lean back, and when they did, their hands touched slightly. The two pulled their hands back, each having a slightly red face and not looking at each other. Neither of them said anything, and Naruto moved his hand back to where it was just a moment ago. When he did, he once again felt a hand. This time, however, he moved his hand over the top of Fu's. After a few seconds had passed, Naruto got nervous, however that nervousness faded when Fu turned her hand around and laced her fingers with his. It's a nice day out, isn't it? Naruto asked as he looked up at the clouds. When he did, he felt a head suddenly make itself known on his shoulder. Yeah, it's a really nice day out, Fu said, letting her head rest on his shoulder. Kakashi, seeing this, smiled under his mask. Well, it's nice to know that leaving Konoha wasn't a massive failure for Naruto, Kakashi thought to himself as he looked at the two in front of him. I wonder if Jiraiya already knows about his location. Kakashi asked himself as he looked at the sky. So you see it too, huh? Kakashi suddenly heard a new voice say from behind him. The silver-haired male looked behind him and saw Shiro walking towards him. Yeah, it's not hard to tell how they feel about each other, Kakashi said, looking at the younger male. They look just like Obito and Rin, Kakashi thought, looking at them. So you think that there will actually be an attack? Goro asked, looking at the male in front of him. It's hard to say, but we shouldn't let our guard down, Kakashi said, looking at the male in front of him. Of course, we shouldn't, Goro said as he noticed the raven-haired male from Konoha walking towards Naruto and Fu. He stopped just in front of them, gaining the attention of the two that at the moment were still sitting on the rock. Hey Naruto, mind if I speak to you, in private? Sasuke asked, looking at the blonde. Oh, sure, I guess, Naruto said as he got up and followed the male to a more private location. So what's up, Sasuke? Naruto asked, looking at the male in front of him. Are you Naruto Uzumaki from Konoha? Sasuke asked, looking at the blonde male in front of him. Naruto looked a little confused and grew a little nervous. Yeah, don't you remember you were the one that helped me escape? Naruto asked, looking at the male in front of him. Yeah, I remember, but the thing is, you're supposed to be dead, Sasuke said, looking at Naruto. When he said this, the blonde's eyes widened and he looked at Sasuke. What do you mean I'm supposed to be dead? Naruto asked, looking at him. Well, a week after you left Konoha, the Hokage got a report that they had found the burnt body of a child that matched your description. Several different people analyzed the body and they all came to the same conclusion. That boy was supposed to be Naruto Uzumaki, Sasuke said, looking at the male in front of him. Why would they think that it was me? Naruto asked, looking at him with a very confused face. Well, like I said, the body was burned so they couldn't recognize it in the least, so they found that he was malnourished like you were. He was around your height and he had a seal on his stomach just like what you have, Sasuke said, looking at Naruto. Naruto placed his hand on his stomach at the mention of the seal. It's true that he always had that strange marking on his stomach, but he had never actually thought anything of it. So how did everyone take it? Naruto asked, looking at Sasuke. Well, most of the village celebrated for an entire week. The shops were giving out free food and candy, and then sake was being passed around like it was a daily occurrence. Then some others like the Hokage just went into solitude for a while. The teacher at the academy, Iruka, actually was in his home for a month straight, not leaving to go to the academy or to even buy food. He just kind of shut down for an entire month, Sasuke said, looking at the blonde in front of him. They celebrated my death. Guess I shouldn't be surprised. After all, the entire village except for a few select people hated me. So it actually makes sense that they would go crazy and be happy that I'm gone. Although it is nice to hear that there were some people who were upset to see me leave. I just didn't think they'd be that happy that I was gone. I mean, they treated me almost as bad as this village treats Fu. The only difference is that I'm not a Jinchuriki. Naruto thought, and near the end of his train of thought, it all clicked and suddenly made sense to him. Those hate-filled stares the nights they would drunk and beat him while calling him names like demon and monster, it just all made sense after that. Naruto then looked down at his stomach. Then those markings are. I'm just like Fu, Naruto thought to himself as he looked back up at Sasuke. Well, thanks, Sasuke. I guess it's good to know that someone actually cared about me, Naruto said, looking at him. Sure thing, Sasuke said, looking at the blonde. I'd also like to thank you for your help all those years ago. Without your help, I'm not sure I could have left Konoha. So thanks, Sasuke. It really means a lot to me, Naruto said, looking at the male in front of him. However, if the two of them had been paying closer attention, they would have noticed the male that was just a few trees away with that ever-present smile on his face. So this really is the Naruto Uzumaki from Konoha. Well then, Lord Danzo will be very pleased to hear about his location, Sai thought as he walked back towards the lake. As Naruto and Sasuke walked back to the large lake, they suddenly heard the sound of kunai flying through the air. The two jumped forward and looked back to see that there were several kunai in the ground. The others, of course, heard the sound that it made when it hit the ground, and everyone looked at them. When they did, several men appeared in front of Naruto and Sasuke. Seems like I missed. Well, guess I good thing that I usually don't miss twice, the man said as he launched another kunai at Sasuke. When he did, he saw that the male's eyes had turned red and that there was 2 tomo on his eyes. Seems like we have someone rather special here, boss. How much do you think someone would pay for those eyes of his? Another male asked as he stepped forward. Don't know, I guess there's only one way to find out, one of the males said, stepping forward. As he did, Kakashi and Goro jumped in front of the two. Seems like we have another payday, boss. Kakashi of the Sharingan. I bet someone would pay even more money for his eye, the male said, looking at Kakashi. I don't know about that. Why would someone pay for just one Sharingan when they could have a matching set? Another male said as he looked at Sasuke. You stay away from Sasuke-kun, Sakura said, looking at the men in front of her. One of the males then turned his head to look at the female and smiled. Hey, boss, I think I'll take the woman, the male said, looking at the pink-haired female in front of him. Kakashi, seeing how outnumbered they were, decided he couldn't afford to hold back. So he slowly reached up to his headband and pulled up to reveal his 3 tomo eye show. No matter how skilled you are, it won't do you any good once I get my hands on the hero's water, the male said, looking at the silver-haired male in front of him. I wouldn't be so sure about that, Kakashi said, looking at the male in front of him. 5 more men jumped down from the trees when he said this, and they each looked at him. Everyone pick a target and keep them busy while I go see about the hero's water, the male said, looking at the figures in front of him. Like the male had said, each of the figures spread out and took on their own opponent. All except for Kakashi and Goro, which seemed to have 4 of them attacking them at once. Usually, it wouldn't be a challenge for them, but seeing as how each time it seemed like one of them got the upper hand, some more from the side would step in. They never could defeat anyone. The male that had ordered the others to attack was walking across the lake where the huge tree was. However, a kunai suddenly cut off his path. He then looked to the side and saw a green-haired female looking at him. He smiled at this and changed his path so that he was heading towards her. Fu, the Jinchuriki of Takigakure. I've heard quite a few rumors about you, the male said, looking at her. Like what? Fu asked, looking at him. Usually, she wouldn't care about some rumors that had started to circulate around her, and that's because she didn't want to get mad and end up doing something she'd later regret. However, this time, it was different. This man wasn't a civilian of Taki, he was a man who had intentions to hurt Taki. So she didn't really care if she hurt him or not. Just a few rumors about you and a certain blonde, the male said with a smile on his face. He then took his hand and pointed to Naruto, who was in the middle of fighting someone. Their kunai met each other and Naruto managed to force the male back. That blonde, if I'm not mistaken, the male said looking at her. Fu dashed forward at this, not wanting to hear anything else that he had to say. When she did, the male pulled out a kunai blocking hers with his own. She started to push the male back just a bit and he made a forced smile while being pushed back. Judging by your reaction and the way those eyes of yours look now, I'd say those rumors are true, the male said as he pushed her back. Fu wondered what he meant and looked in the lake beside her. When she did, she saw that her usually orange eyes had turned into a pale white color. Fu heard the male beside her suddenly move, and when she looked at him she saw that he was just a few feet away from her, and reacting on instinct she jumped back and threw her kunai at the male in front of her. The male smiled and caught the kunai as it went past him. He then once again lunged at the girl, sending the kunai he had just caught in front of him. Fu went to dodge, and when she saw the male just a few feet away from her with kunai in hand, she then felt a sharp pain in her back. This sudden pain surprised her, and as a result, she didn't move when the male in front of her used the kunai to pierce her stomach. This sent Fu into shock and she coughed up some blood, only for a pain that felt the same as before to hit her in several different spots in the back. When she turned her head to see what it was, she saw several shuriken in her back. You know, if you had paid attention to the one extra male we have, you'd notice that he almost never misses and only acts as a support for the rest of us, the male said as Fu fell to the ground. Fu, the green-haired female, heard the familiar voice that she loved to her call out to her. She then looked to her side and saw that Naruto was running towards her. She then fell back and Naruto caught her. Shit, Fu, you're in bad shape, Naruto said looking at her. He then began to remove the shuriken from her back and turned her over to so that he could look at her. Fu, listen to me, everything's going to be fine. We'll get you back to Taki and the medics can heal you, just hold on, Naruto said looking at Fu. The green-haired female looked up at Naruto and saw that his usually bright blue eyes were filled with tears that threatened to overflow at any moment. Naruto, Fu said as she reached her hand up to touch the blonde's cheek. Please don't cry, you look so much better when you smile, Fu said looking at Naruto. I can't help it, Fu, you're my best friend. I don't know what I'd do if I lost you, Naruto said, tears finally flowing from his eyes. I know it may hurt now, but you're strong, you've always been strong. I can't tell you how many times I've been close to my breaking point and you were the one that saved me, Fu said looking at Naruto. Naruto suddenly felt a shockwave hit him. When he looked behind him, he saw the man that had done this to Fu with the bottle of hero's water in his hand and blue chakra cloak around him. Naruto felt his anger get the best of him and he was about to go over to him, but he suddenly heard Fu's voice call out to him, which brought him back to his senses. Naruto, the blonde looked at the green-haired female, tears once again in his eyes. I know this is a bit selfish of me, but I want you to stay here with me, please. Fu asked looking at Naruto with a smile on her face. Naruto nodded and brought Fu closer to him. Fu smiled at this and looked up at the blonde in front of her. Kakashi looked over at Naruto, who was holding Fu. However, the male with the chakra cloak suddenly dashed at him, forcing Kakashi to jump.